Hello, everyone. This is Theodore Naika from Speaker Astrology, bringing astrology to life. And I just thought I'd share a couple of thoughts about the current Mars retrograde and Mercury retrograde that we are experiencing at the moment. Now, I know we're kind of still under the influence of the eclipses, and the eclipses happen every year. So um, I'm not a I'm not a fan of people sort of losing their minds just because eclipses are happening, because it's a natural part of life. Just as the normal planets go through their retrograde motions every year, and we are experiencing quite a lot of that at the moment. But the lights, the sun and the moon, do not go retrograde, or that means they do not appear to be moving backwards or in reverse from the perspective of the Earth. But they do have their own sort of reset cycle, which is what we're calling eclipses. So the purpose of eclipses, and they happen every year, is to allow us to reset things in our life. And usually, because it means, eclipses, there's some affliction to the lights, the sun and the moon that are happening in the sky as events that most of us can see if we're lucky enough. The eclipses represent sort of clearing the table, clearing our space of things that we ourselves are not really able to clear up, or we ourselves are not able to become aware of that need to be cleared. So it's sort of a way of the universe coming in, stepping into our life, putting the lights out, so to speak. So giving our awareness and the games between our awareness and consciousness and our life a break, and removing the ego consciousness out of the stream of life to reset things for us. So the best way to go with eclipses when they happen, or if they are affecting you personally, is to align with them and allow them to just reset whatever needs to be reset. Take the signals and the messages that you may be getting from them, in terms of your willpower and how you are negotiating it with life, and adjust your sails accordingly. And I think that's a much smoother way to work with eclipses going forward. But this video, I want to specifically talk about the Mars cycle and the Mercury cycle in very, very simple terms. So we're having them both happen at the same time, around the time of eclipses, which is why everyone is sort of losing their minds a little bit. So let's just get some clarity on what is going on. First of all, Mercury, being a planet in the system of astrology, that is, we say below the sphere of the sun, below the sphere of the sun, are the planets Mercury, Venus, and the Moon, and then of course the Earth. Now, Mercury being a so-called inner planet, whenever it goes through its retrograde cycle, just like Venus, it's about resetting or changing something in a way, just like an eclipse. But the outer planets away from the sun's orbit, such as Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in particular, when they undergo a retrograde cycle, it's about adjustment. It's not so much about resetting things, it's just about reorienting, learning something new, re-looking at things, and adjusting how we want to be contributing into society, whatever it is that we feel like we should be doing in our life. So that's the first difference between the two cycles. They're not treated the same way. The way to work with them is not the same way. Mercury retrograde cycles, people say, you have to review, rework, reevaluate things in your life, but that could apply to any retrograde cycle. Okay, the specific thing about Mercury comes from the houses that Mercury rules. Mercury rules the natural third house, Gemini, and the natural sixth house, being Virgo, of the zodiac. And what this means is that it's strange because these are houses actually in astrology that Mars really likes. The third house and the sixth house are about convincing people to do things and our ability to fight and keep our immunity up and work hard in life. So it's strange that together the Mercury's houses are where Mars actually enjoys that kind of environment, where is thriving with word and communication in the third house, where we are convincing other people about something that we believe or we care about, or that we want. That's why we communicate. And in the sixth house, that's kind of what happens when people don't listen or are not convinced. They can become our enemies, they can work against us, or in some cases, we're actually working against ourselves in improper communication. So from the third house of the astrological chart, where we're talking about communicating, expressing your ideas to convince people of something, if it works out, then we end up in the fifth house where we become creative, where we apply our energies and our willpower, and we feel more enlivened and vivified with life to do so. This is the natural sign of Leo, where actually Mercury is currently retrograde. But if our convincing and our communication meets a wall and doesn't really move us forward, then we end up in the sixth house where we're having to take alternative methods. We either submit to the other influence and what environment dictates to us as a conventionally hard labor, and we have to work with it. We have to learn to submit to it and align with it in that way. Or we fight, we resist, and the perception of enemies and our friends comes into play there. So communication going from the third house to the fifth house creates friends in our life, the 11th house, and communication not working and going to the sixth house, we end up sometimes being very isolated. So this, I feel, is the process between Mercury and Mars, is that they are controlling and coordinating communication and expression, and also our ability to either fight for ourselves or fight against somebody else to get what we want in life. And that can have both positive and negative consequences. But essentially, they really are about the third house and the sixth house. Now, the first house and the eighth house, which are naturally sort of Mars houses, that's something different, okay? But in relation to Mercury in particular, Mars and Mercury naturally don't really go together. That's what you would think, because one is like focusing on learning and communication and sharing information, and the other one is a lot more hands-on and less about talking. So during the Mercury retrograde period and the Mars retrograde period happening together, these are the two processes of communication that are being challenged to be looked at again. How are we communicating with people, which is a general Mercury retrograde sort of thing. But in addition, with the Mars retrograde, what's coming through is, well, are we fighting or are we aligning? So how are we using that energy that we've got to either, sort of convincing people about things and other people trying to impose their opinions and ideas upon us, whether this is social media or online or in our workplace. Everyone's going to be feeling a little bit sensitive about this process of convincing people and being heard. So if you want to get along with people during the Mars and Mercury retrograde cycles, is to just simply listen and try not to be reactive to what you're hearing, what people are trying to convince you about, because especially with the Mercury retrograde cycle going through Leo, people want to be heard so that they can move forward with self-development in a creative kind of way. But what's happening is that unless Mars is working together with Mercury in your life, and you're actually applying activities and changes in your daily routine about how you're doing what you're doing, and not just changing how you're thinking or how you're speaking, things are not going to really work. So your daily routine needs to be aligned with the changing of perspective about your life in terms of what you thought was necessary, irrelevant, and also going forward in terms of how you want to maybe also convince yourself about what you need to do or what you need to not do going forward. Mars essentially is about force, and that's how most people will talk about Mars. But there's a big part to Mars energy that is really about protection, protecting our bodies through immunity, strengthening ourselves. When we encounter difficulties in life, it is the Mars energy that comes forward to help us with resilience and willpower. The strengthening of the willpower is coming through the Mars energy and the protection of what we want to do in life. So, and this is where I want to bring the moon in, because the moon energy has a lot to do with Mercury and Mars. And I feel if we're having Mercury and Mars issues in our life during the retrograde period, where our communication is leading us into problems, or we cannot be as forthright or forward going with what we want to do as we would like. Basically, there's a revision process that we need to be going through. But the moon can really help both of those planetary archetypes. And the way I've understood this is that the moon signs, both Taurus and Cancer, on either sides of these signs, you've got an air sign and you've got a fire sign. So for me, that means to me that the moon energy can really assist us in understanding how to be inspired, how to go forward in life, and how to communicate effectively. Having a good understanding of your moon sign, whatever that is in your chart, is really going to help you navigate through the current Mars and Mercury retrograde cycles. Because essentially, Mercury is just about messages, communication and stimulation going back and forth. And during Mercury retrograde, some wires are going to be crossed and things like that can happen. And especially with Mars retrograde, there's a lot of short fuses going around with various kind of people who are sort of tied into that, resonant with that energy. But Mars, I said, protects us. Mars protects us through the alignment of these themes of courage and resilience and persistence and perseverance in life with what we want to do. This kind of allows us to have the discipline to push through with something. That is one side of it. That protects us from external bullshit. Okay? But the moon protects us from internal bullshit, our own inhibitions that are in our way, our past conditioning, the memories, the sentiments, the nostalgia, the depression, whatever the case may be. Strengthening your moon is going to help you resist and improve and protect you from the inside. And what does that mean? How does the moon protect us? The moon protects us essentially by the principle of contentment and peace. And understand, the card that I pulled up before the reading was the Four of Wands. And what the book says about the Four of Wands, I'm not really a tarot reader, but what the Four of Wands essentially was saying was that there's something as a potential celebration and a persistence of that light and that fire that needs to be honored. And I look at that as the Mars and the moon as well. So my advice during the Mercury and Mars retrograde cycle is to find out in your life, or make a list, what you can be content with going forward as a part of, I've achieved something, I've come so far over the last several months doing X, Y, and Z, and I appreciate that, and I'm content with that. It doesn't need to change. From those new behaviors and systems in my life, whether I've had an illness setback or a job setback or a family setback or something, nevertheless, keeping those triggers aside, I can still say I've progressed in A, B, and C areas of my life, from which I have security to grow personally. That is sort of the strength and the mental peace and contentment that the moon energy can really give you, right? And if you then, from that point of view, make a list, a separate Mars list for those things in your life in terms of, that need to change in terms of how you're doing them. So interrogate how you're doing work, interrogate how you're doing health, interrogate how you're doing familial relationships, and find out how you can make a change in terms of what you are doing tangibly to improve the situation, not necessarily trying to force other people to align with what you want, but rather, how do I want this to change for me going forward with my friends or work or family or whatever the case may be? That will help you protect yourself externally, because you're not creating new enemies. You're not continuing the separatist mentality of it's me versus the world, it's me versus other people, which is what can create a negative Mars reaction, but rather use it to say, well, I'm fighting for something in my life and I'm adjusting the way I'm doing it, because from a personal development point of view, I want to shine in a particular way going forward. And then we can talk about the Mercury retrograde in Leo, which then understands finally what to say about itself, how to express its own light in that way, and the light of life and personality and willpower that is inherent in every person. So that's just a short video I wanted to share about the eclipses and Mars and Mercury retrograde cycle. I hope it's been helpful for you, and just forget the bullshit. Just focus on maintaining your internal protection, your external protection in these ways, and you will be all right. Thank you. Bye-bye.